Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Hey there. We're 1 minute late, which is not bad, because just as I was about to go live, StreamYard said, you don't have any more storage. And so I had to delete some old videos. They're now gone, except they're still up on YouTube. I don't understand how any of this stuff works. But anyway, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Reasonably Fine Art Talk. I thought I'd talk a little about what I've got going on and sort of the decisions and challenges that I have encountered. My thought this year, last year I did a bunch of the plein air events and I was my year of triumph. I won the grand prize at Plein Air Easton. I won first prize at Door County. I won best body of work at Plein Air Smokies. And so I said, I am going to rest upon my laurels. I'm not going to do a zillion events because I've been doing them for 10 years. And I really, time to give somebody else a shot, So I thought I've got a show this fall at William Basic Gallery in William Basic Fine Art in Northampton, Massachusetts. So why not paint the world I know? That is the area basically between the middle of the Connecticut River Valley in Vermont. So from about White River Junction north down to Northampton, Mass, south. That's really where I've spent the majority of my adulthood. And approach that like a plein air event. Go out and paint all day like I do at a plein air event. I do a morning painting. I do an afternoon painting. Aim for 2 a day. That's 2 paintings a day. And, just treat, rather than doing a competition, just do it as as Thoreau said, I have traveled widely and conquered. Why not just paint that world that I know in the way that I paint? Because when I think about it, to me, the distinctive thing about my work is my ability to do these monochromatic, journalistic plein air paintings. There isn't really anybody else I've run into who does that. Or whether or not they can do it and just choose not to, I don't know. But I can do it and I choose to do it. And that the picture up there is pretty typical. I just set up somewhere and then I smear paint on, and then smear it off for a couple hours until I get an acceptable image. So why not just do that? Well, the problem is, as I have now learned, that if you don't have the carrot and stick of being at a plein air event, making the time to get out there and paint consistently is very hard, because I'm sure all of you basically have this same challenge in our society and in our inner mental filing system. Going and painting, as desirable as it may be, always feels, well, I can put that off a little bit and go work on, because I've got to get this other thing done. Let me tell you about some of the other things that have been getting done. Now let's see if I can get this right. Gonna go to this slide. Oh, the great Betty Sue, ladies and gentlemen. She is unavailable today because she's off. She is doing a tour that she had a couple of days off that starts up again tonight with Kim Ritchie, the great songwriter, and her friend Bonnie Whitmore, doing small venues in Texas up to Kansas and Missouri. And then, as soon as that tour is done, she has to drive essentially nonstop to Tucson, Arizona, and start a West Coast tour with James McMurtry. Do I regularly paint plein air with a group? I do not. I used to paint with Putney painters all the time, but then the pandemic happened and Richard Schmid moved on to his next great adventure, and I really have not gotten back into painting with a group. That might be helpful. Except I will say my Putney painter friends do seem to enjoy painting adorable small children in costumes playing loops, and that really isn't my jam, as the kids say. Hi, Tony Hewlett. Hi, Alicia. Okay, next slide, please, Charles. So I'm going to say to myself, next slide, please, because I don't have Betty Sue. Next slide, please, Charles. Here is one of the things that has taken my time the last few days. You may have heard we had a little bit of flooding up here in Vermont. I am fine. The place I live in, Bellows Falls, is, even though it's surrounded by rivers, it is pretty high up. And we tend, knock on wood, not to have bad flooding. Friends in Weston, friends in Londonderry, friends in Ludlow, friends in Chester got nailed. But we've been fine in Bellows Falls. But to give you a sense, this is about Nikki Heenan, who's with us today. She was part of the Friar Hunter gathering that we had in May. Nikki, that's about 1/8 of a mile from my studio, right? It's just down the hill. There's this stone arch bridge that the railroad is still using, but on the left is what it normally looks like. And on the right, that great photo by Crystal Thompson of the train going over it yesterday morning. There's a lot of water moving through here. And it's just been kind of nerve-wracking because I've got really good friends who run a farm stand, and it's been tough. It's been tough. Next slide, please, Charles. So that's taken up my time a bit. The other thing that's taken up my time, and I can now go to this and my head comes back. The other thing I've been involved in is, see up there on the left, this really cute little diner, the Miss Bellows Falls. It was built in the early 1940s. It has survived. It was barely surviving the last couple of years before the pandemic. Then the pandemic hit and it closed. And the building is starting to deteriorate. I'm very involved with a local group that has purchased it, is working with Preservation Trust of Vermont to renovate it and restore it and get it so it can function in the 21st century food service environment. That probably will mean some additional seating, maybe moving it back from the road a little bit. We just don't know yet, but we're starting to work on this. And I am right now very involved in fundraising for it. So if you feel like it, ladies and gentlemen, just PayPal. PayPal is $1 or $2. And I'll say it's I'll credit the Reasonably Fine Art Talk listeners. The current fundraiser I'm doing is we're raising funds where you get naming rights on a stool. And I do a humor night on Sunday nights, a live stream where I read old Robert Benchley short pieces that my dad used to read to me as a kid. And so I'm trying to raise money for the Robert Benchley stool. It's $5,000 for a stool. So it's like a $500,000 project, ladies and gentlemen. It's a big project. But I've raised like $2,000 of the $5,000, so we're well on our way. So if you feel like it, toss us $1. You'll see on the right I'm working on a painting of the diner. It's in the early stages. Get to exercise my old sign painting lack of skill. I hope to have this done by the end of the summer and maybe make some prints as another fundraising tool. But anyway, the diner has taken a lot of time. It's taken a lot of time. So painting has kind of taken a back seat. Now let's see. Next slide, please, Charles. Here we go. I'm going to make my head go away, and I'm just going to go through the paintings that I have gotten done for this show. As I say, it opens in October at William Basic Fine Art in Northampton, Mass. My subject matter is basically where I have lived in my adulthood. This may look like Bellows Falls to some of you, ladies and gentlemen, but it is not. This is Turner's Falls, Massachusetts, which is another old mill town on the Connecticut River in western Massachusetts, basically a little east of Greenfield. This is an old Strathmore paper mill that is now some of its storage units, some of its apartments. And I went down one beautiful beautiful morning in late May, I think, and set up and did this little painting. Now, what I thought I'd do today is talk a little about what I think works and what doesn't work in each of these pieces. What I was trying to do was have this strange juxtaposition of these two roads. There's the lower road and then the road you can see the guardrail for on the right-hand side. Well, the guardrails for both roads. But these two roads, and it kind of comes together, and I wanted to punch with the dark shadow side of that building in the background. That really is where the eye goes, and there are a bunch of different devices that are used to move the eye back there. From the lower left, there's that thrust of the road into the center. Maybe I'll make my head very small down here. There's the thrust of the road into the center. There is the road that is right in front of the viewer and the guardrail that leads right back to that building. So it's basically arrows that are pointing to that building. And the verticals from the left to right of smokestack, utility pole, utility pole, utility pole, and then trees are what I'm using to stitch the foreground and stitch the earth and the sky together. This is a 6x12. Virtually all these pieces are 6x12. I have great plans to get into doing much larger pieces, 12x24s or even 16x32s, or maybe some other sizes I haven't thought of yet. But my inertia has prevented that until now. This is at Harlow Farm, one of the farms that we were very worried about with the flooding. This was painted before the floods. This is from June, early June, I think. And they survived pretty well. They just lost one field of lettuces and one field of kale. But it's a wonderful, wonderful organic farm. They supply, Whole Foods or whatever company that is now in the Northeast. But this also uses the device of the road on the left-hand side. So you'll see I'm not consciously thinking, oh, this is a device that will work when I set up. But I certainly can see common solutions to painting problems that I use consistently in my work. And one is that roadway leading the viewer in. And that will appear elsewhere in these paintings that I'm showing. This is a 8x16, I believe. Were the poles through the dark space there, or were they added or moved? They were there, Jim. I'm pretty journalistic in these paintings. Even though I think this is probably the thing that I do most distinctively, I still like doing studio work, and my studio work is much less journalistic. But I'm pretty truthful when I'm painting from life, mostly because, well, for two reasons. One, I want to see if I can come up with a solution to problems that I encounter, if I can come up with a truthful solution. And two, because I am not really trying to make a great statement beyond just accurately getting the feel of a day. One thing I wanted to point out on this, you can see brush strokes in the grasses in the foreground. This is one of my muslin panels that is gessoed with 4 coats of gesso. I do not sand in between coats. I may sand very lightly before I start painting just to knock the tooth down a little bit, but I like the fugitive brush marks that are left. I don't know if it's a frozen screen, Nikki. And Jim says, I'll show that, Jim. Just curious how much you exercise artistic license, as you explained with the road. Yeah. So everything is there. I kind of emphasize one thing or another. Oh, I have a cat coming in to complain about something. I went into the other room. No worries. This is at the Bellows Falls Rail Yard. It's one of my favorite places to paint. Late afternoon there, you get beautiful raking light across these cars we call baby powder cars. They are, it's a limestone slurry, talc. And that's the old Railway Express office on my left. The utility pole is extremely important here. And the darkest dark there is like a phone box, or maybe it's an electrical service on that utility pole. That is, I think, is really important. If that wasn't there, I think it would be kind of too simplistic with those horizontals of the railway cars and the rails and the vertical of the building. It really needs that utility pole, and it's very fortunate that that utility pole actually is canted at that slightly strange angle. Does anyone else have frozen screen problems, or is it just Nikki? Let me know if none of you are seeing what I'm talking about. Next slide, please. Oh, Jim says he sees how the foreground is warmer than the background. Is that on this one of the rail cars? Yeah, well, using one of the things I like about using the monochrome, Jim, is that I have to, drawing and value and edge has to be so much more important than if one is working with full chroma. And by using one monochromatic warm dark brown, the only thing I have to worry about in terms of kind of color intensity is the thickness of the paint film. So there we go. This was also at the same place the next night. I came down down to the Bellows Falls Rail Yard, feeling very inspired and sort of believing my own publicity that I was a really terrific artist. And I started to paint into the sun, the late afternoon light, blaring into my eyes of the depot and the bridge. And it was a terrible painting, ladies and gentlemen. It was a terrible painting. And I scraped it down, and then I did the pivot, which is you turn from the unsuccessful painting and you take your easel and you face the other way, or just 30 degrees the other way, and paint what's in front of you there. It was a railroad car. And this was drippy. This is the squeegee. I made one squeegee mark, which is the top of the railroad car halfway down. That is just a pole with the squeegee, and it caused those drips in the very center of the painting. And I was like, okay, that is going to be the railroad car. And I really like the feel of this one. This is a 6x12. It's got about as thick paint as I ever put on a canvas on that upper right side, applied with the palette knife. But I was trying to have a real interplay of tight and loose. So Jim Roth says, frozen screen, try changing video quality to 360. I did this. Are you saying, Jim, that my screen is frozen, or is that advice to Nikki? Let's see. I don't know. Jim's saying see settings at the bottom. I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it's Nikki. So anyway, my video was frozen. Is my video no longer frozen, Jim? Am I just using, okay, yeah, let's get back to talking about art. Sandra asks, are you just using water or are you using a medium? I use water for the first pass for my big shapes. And let's talk about this one. This is Chester Depot. I would do I have my paint mixture, which is Van Dyke Brown, raw umber, and unbleached titanium mixed together. So it's a little bit more opaque. The raw umber is very, very transparent. It's the greenish brown. Van Dyke Brown is an orangish brown. And the unbleached titanium is titanium buff. And it just makes things a little bit more opaque, which is how I enjoy painting in the summer when there's more humidity in the air. It feels more natural to me. I make a pile of that color. I take my chip brush, my 2 or 3 inch chip brush, and I dip that in water, and then I create a slurry on my palette, and I slop that on the panel. And then using a paper towel, I pretty much pull out the big shapes. That's what I did here. So water is used initially, but then when I start painting, I really don't use water as my medium. I use water and safflower oil mixed together, or I'll use pure safflower oil, or I'll use out of the tube oil paint. But if I'm using water and the oil paint in any sustained manner once the painting is going, it's just like using mineral spirits and conventional oils. It eats into the paint in a way that you probably really don't want it doing. That you don't want it doing in. I'm sorry. This is the problem when I'm trying to do everything at once. I'm gonna get rid of her Sandra Schultz's question. It's gonna just show up there constantly. Okay, hide. There we go. I would not use water throughout. It's going to just be problematic. This is also up toward Chester Depot. This road, this dirt road is the Green Mountain Turnpike. So one of my favorite jokes is to say, oh, the traffic was terrible out on the turnpike today. I liked the late afternoon. Late afternoon is my favorite time to paint just because the low light, you get such great dramatic effects. I'm going to go back to the other one though in a minute because I didn't get finished talking about it. But the eye leads you in, then the railroad track cutting across, the eye can skip over because the value gets very light. Even though the line of the railroad tracks continues in the road, the line is so light that the eye can skip over and then climbs that little hillock where the light is really hitting it. The railroad crossing crossbucks, I think I'm going to knock down slightly in the studio. Just hit with with an oily, basically an oily glaze of this color and just make the value a little less strong. I'm going to jump back a second to this painting. This painting I really like because the darkest dark is the overhang of the eaves of the Chester Depot. And then the trucks over there on the left are also dark, but I kept the shapes so simple that I don't think the eye really lingers over there on the left. I think the eye travels back, and you see the white dot that's kind of directly under the eaves. I think that's very important. That was actually a train coming toward me. Um, that was truthful, but it came toward me and then went past me. And the engineer looked down as if, what the hell is that guy doing? Um, but I think this is a pretty successful painting. This painting made me happy. Let's see. Next slide, please, Charles. This one, well, this one is in rural Rockingham. I think this may be underwater at the moment, but I think it survived just fine, actually. I think the flooding was a little bit north of here. Late afternoon, there's a lot of glare on, not a very good photograph. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. But this road, it's very nice because it has no traffic on it. And it has that nice march of utility poles. I was not terribly happy with this painting because to me, it felt like I was painting the idea of utility poles more than closely witnessing them. Now that I look at it a few days later, I'm not as annoyed by it as I was. But I think it is important to pay attention to that inner voice saying, this is truthful, this is not truthful. I felt like I kind of mailed those telephone lines in as opposed to closely looking at them. And actually, I think that does still hold water when I look at it. That is not the same thing as saying, oh, I'm a terrible painter, I'm no good. I have accepted that I am pretty good at this, the way that I paint. But if I am going to accept that, I have to be rigorous in my self-review, in my self-critique. Things I like about this painting, I like how I mixed in more of the titanium buff on that far hill. So it ends up with almost a bluish cast. Because I love the idea of how much color conversation can I pull out of using this one monochromatic mix. I've got three components, so I can push, I can push things toward the titanium buff side, I can push things toward the orangey Van Dyke brown side, or I can push things toward the greenish raw umber side. And this has the best kind of color conversation going on of the paintings that I've done to date. And that is encouraging to me that as I've progressed on this very stop and start adventure this summer, it feels like my way of seeing has gotten more sophisticated, whether or not I love the particular painting or not. The tree, it was about to rain, a thunderstorm was coming in, so the tree was done hurriedly. The oily, watery mixture that I used for the branches was a little too thick, so the branches are a little clunkier than I wanted them to be. But overall, looking at this, I think it does have a pleasant sense of depth, and I think works pretty well. Next slide, please, Charles. And then we're at the end. We're at the end. Yes, because I've been, reasonably fine art talks have gotten awfully long. When I started them, my goal was to be 15 to 25 minutes long, and they're now almost always like an hour. So that basically covers what I've been up to. I want to do like another 20 paintings. My goal is to choose from like 30 paintings for this show. Next week, I'm going to go down to Easton, and I will be judging the local color event. We'll be doing a reasonably fine art talk from Plein Air Easton. And then the week after that, we're going to have the great Terry Allen, who's a tremendous musician and kind of conceptual artist friend from Santa Fe and Austin. He'll be with us, I guess, 2 weeks from now. But anyway, I do hope to be getting out a lot more once I get back from Easton, though I will continue to be working on the diner. So as I say, you feel like tossing us a few dollars, just hit me up at PayPal and you'll get a thank you. And I'll be trying to stay dry. And I will let you know how the rest of the summer goes. I just have to get out there and really put the time in. I tell everybody to put the time in, and there I'm not doing it. Do as I say, not as I do, ladies and gentlemen. You take good care. Great talking with you today. And sorry about any technical hiccups if there were. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.